Someone demonstrated a lot of skill up here, just to make the room below the special place that it is, a unique restaurant with a vintage atmosphere. And rarely will you find a contemporary ceiling to match this example of tasteful architecture. Throughout history, people have tried all sorts of things to improve the look of their ceilings. They've painted them, paneled them, decorated them with fixtures, and created elaborate embossed metal designs for them that attempted to make the ceiling itself a work of art. What you see here isn't just a beautiful ceiling, it's a cover-up. And in the ceiling areas of today's buildings, there are still things that need covering up, like joists, vents, plumbing, conduit, and ductwork. But the modern do-it-yourselfer has easier ways to accomplish this. Basically, it's an old idea, freshened up with space-age materials and methods. I'm Kurt Burbick, and that's what this week's program is about. But Avian is going to tell you more about it.
You're looking at one of those things that people want to cover up first in making an overall improvement in their room. An old plaster ceiling in deteriorating condition. And one of the products that people will use often in making that kind of cover-up is ceiling tile. I'm Avian Rogers. In the next half hour, Kurt and I are going to show you how to install two types of manufactured ceilings, a suspended ceiling and a ceiling tile. Now, a suspended ceiling is one that's usually hung from a metal grid work, and ceiling tile is attached either directly to the ceiling by glue or over metal furring strips which you've nailed or screwed to the ceiling. We'll cover some of the common ceiling problems that this kind of ceiling solves, and the tools and materials that you'll need to do the job, along with some of the frequently encountered installation hang-ups. Now, aside from showing you how to install a new ceiling, we'll give you some tips on trim work and plaster ceiling repair. But before we get into all that, let's go down and take a look at some of the tools that we'll need to do any of these methods.
For both tile and suspended ceilings, it's a good idea to have a 20-foot tape measure, a square, either a carpenter's or a combination, carpenter's pencil, a straight edge, string, and a level, a utility knife, a good hammer, a drywall pan, fiberglass tape, and a putty knife. You'll need nails for both types of ceilings, and for work with suspended ceilings, you'll want to add tin snips, pliers, wire, and eye screws. You can use a handsaw, or you can use a utility knife.
But if you use a utility knife, make sure it's got a sharp blade. Cutting evenly really makes a big difference.
Oh, I almost forgot. You may want to keep a couple of toothpicks handy. And I'm going to tell you...
Don't tell me. You're going to tell us later on in the show.
How'd you guess? Well, let's move on to our first project. The ceiling is one of the two largest surfaces that a room can have. And it's the one surface where gravity is against you almost the entire time you're working.
That can make working over your head kind of tough. Before the invention of suspended ceilings, people would panel their ceilings with wooden planks or drywall over joists to create a ceiling.
Or in a lot of cases of original construction, people went to the incredible trouble of installing lath and plaster ceilings.
None of these methods, however, are as easy and convenient as suspended ceilings, if for no other reason than weight. A suspended ceiling is so much lighter, it can make a big difference in installation.
So, just to make the point about working with ceilings, we've had this one built just to show you how to deal with suspended panels.
It's got most all the problems you would face in a typical home.
Now, if you have a situation involving exposed ductwork in your ceiling like we've got here, or electrical wiring or exposed plumbing pipes like these that are below the system of the joists,
But the joists are unfinished and exposed, you've got a situation that lends itself well to suspended ceilings.
a suspended ceiling is one that's hung below the joists of an existing ceiling, and that's usually accomplished by hanging a metal grid at some desired height by wires off the existing joists.
Where you have objects hanging down from the main surface area of your ceiling, like a dryer vent, for example, you can use the same metal gridwork material that you use on your main ceiling to box those objects in. Now, there are other reasons to use suspended ceilings besides the obvious. You can reduce the height of your finished existing ceiling, simplify access to your ductwork or piping,
or accomplish any of the other things you might use a panel ceiling to do.
And take my word for it, planning your ceiling in advance is one of the simplest things you can do to make your job easier in the long run.
There are several things to plan around, too. For one, it's generally accepted that the minimum desired ceiling height be 7 foot 6 inches, so you don't want to create a space with less clearance than this. For another, most suspended systems require a minimum of 3 inches clearance between any ductwork piping and the ceiling itself. And then when you throw in things like recessed lighting fixtures, that dimension can become as much as 5 inches. In any case, don't forget to consider all of these things when you decide what ceiling height you want to go with.
Now, if you were installing 2x4 panels, most people would install them so that they run parallel to the short wall. But since we're installing square panels, it really doesn't make any difference at all. Now, using graph paper and drawing to scale, draw your ceiling the way that you're going to install it, making sure to show the position of any vents, light fixtures, or other special treatments that you might have. Now, this is important. Give particular priority to any posts or columns that you might have so that these objects don't obstruct with the actual installation of your metal grid.
The key components of a suspended ceiling, like the one we'll be installing here, are made up of just a few simple pieces that I'd like to show you on this mock-up. First, there's this angle mold or wall molding that gets attached to the wall that supports the ends of these runners, which are designed to go the long way of the room. And they're also supported by these wires from the joists. Then these cross tees hold the runners together and create these spaces or these cells so that we can install our individual panels. And the individual panels are typically 2 foot square or 2 foot by 4 foot in size. All of these metal pieces, by the way, come in accent colors and wood grain finishes, which obviously give you some added possibilities when you're designing your system. Now, the process of installing a suspended ceiling begins with selecting a ceiling height and then installing this wall molding at that height level all the way around the room. Then, after this metal grid has been installed, placing the individual panels is really child's play. And even though there are some minor differences from one system to the other, what we're about to show you applies to all suspended ceilings, whether it's a 2 foot square or a 2 foot by a 4 foot grid system.
It's essential to get an actual level line so that your ceiling in turn is level. To do this, measure up in all 4 corners your desired ceiling height. In this case, we want an 8 foot ceiling. Then simply take your chalk line and snap a line across each wall connecting all the points.
Working around the room, nail your angle molding up end to end. Use your chalk line as a level reference. You've got to do a little planning to figure out where to place your layout lines for your runners that go up next. First, measure the width of the room. Ours is 9 foot 4 inches wide, and this means that we're going to end up with 2 border rows that are less than a full tile in width. And since it's very important that a border row be more than half a panel wide, we had to do a little figuring on paper with some different layouts. And as a result of that, we've decided to convert the 9 foot 4 inches to 6 foot 40 inches, so now we can divide the 40 inches into 2 20-inch wide border rows. And we're going to explain and demonstrate this again later in the show when we talk about ceiling tile. Now, mark your main runner positions by snapping chalk lines from wall to wall. These will go across the joists at 48-inch intervals. Next, create a system of hangers by putting screw eyes into the joists. These you'll position according to your chalk line marks at 4 foot intervals. Attach your wire to your screw eyes. Bend each wire into a right angle so that it will hold the runner at the correct height. A reference string stretched between nails in the walls at the level of the runner holes is a big help here. Your runner ends should rest on the wall angle or molding. The runners must be level, so be sure to check each one before twisting the wire tight and finishing off the installation. Your cross tees come next. They simply lock into position just as you see it here. Once the grid's up, you can start right in, putting up your panels.
Suspended ceilings are available in fiberglass, mineral fiber, wood fiber, or translucent plastic. They come in a variety of different styles. You can even get panels that look like marble.
Remember these toothpicks? Okay, Avian, I know you're not going to ask me about these, so come on down. I want to show you a trick. Now, see how I can lift this panel into place with these toothpicks without touching it with my fingers and getting it all smudgy?
Yeah.
Well?
I think I'll just stick with clean hands. Thanks anyway, Kurt.
Well, it's the thought that counts.
Well, here's a thought. You can use a utility knife or a handsaw to cut your panels for your ceiling tile. Now, I'm using a utility knife because you can get a little sharper cut that way. Now, we need to cut the border tiles, and we still need to maintain this flange that hangs down a little bit in our grid. Now, to do that, I measure over the distance of the actual opening. And then I'm going to cut with my straight edge along that line about halfway down. Not quite, but almost. Okay. Then I move my straight edge out about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And this will be my actual total cutting line. I'll cut along the straight edge. Since we're cutting all the way through on this one, it'll probably take 2 or 3 scores with my knife. Okay, there, it just falls away. All right, now the trick. Take your utility knife and you lay it down flat on the table and cut into the edge of your panel. All the way through. Cuts real easily. We've got our flange. Take that away. Now, when you're handling your tile, handle it carefully because the edges can damage easily, and work with clean hands as much as possible.
Installing a lighting fixture in this kind of a ceiling system is a breeze. You can put in either fluorescent or incandescent fixtures, and they can be either surface mounted or recessed. We're going to put in this recessed incandescent fixture, and I've pre-cut a hole in my panel to fit this light. And you'll notice these adjustable leg pieces, so then once my panel is in place, I can reach up in here, open the legs out, so the weight of the light fixture will be carried on the metal frame. Putting this up in here is a pretty easy thing to do. Now, because this suspended ceiling system gives us a little room between the joists and the ceiling itself, I can get up there now and do my wiring very simply. And this kind of a fixture will hook right into a standard 110-volt household wiring system. Just remember, even though we cover the specifics of that in a later program, to turn off the electrical circuit before you actually start hooking any wires up. Now I just want to put in this finished cap piece. and I'll get to wiring that up a little later. Just let me mention about trim. If you want to, you can add a piece of ceiling trim here. We've chosen not to do that because we think the appearance of this ceiling is fine just like it is. Now, Avian's going to give you some tips on taking care of your new suspended ceiling.
One of the nice things about today's new ceiling products is they're washable. Another thing is they're easy to fix should any of the panels become stained, soiled, or damaged. You simply pop out the bad ones and replace them. And to do that, all that takes is a sturdy ladder and clean hands. Of course, you always have the option to paint. Why don't we go back to the house and we'll take a look at how to install ceiling tile using a new metal furring system. As attractive and functional as ceiling tile can be, a big reason why do-it-yourselfers install it is to cover up some existing problems. And this particular ceiling, as you've seen before, has got several.
Ceiling tile is a great cosmetic fix for stained or cracked plaster.
In many cases, they've tried quick fixes like repainting or patching the old plaster, only to find that a quick fix often isn't a lasting one.
If you have any of these kinds of problems with your ceiling, one answer is the kind of ceiling we're going to show you next, tile. It's simple and it's permanent.
Since we wanted to show you one of the latest and simplest ways of installing ceiling tiles, we decided to use this new metal furring system, which is available in kit form and can be used with a number of different styles of tile. Now, using a kit like this, you'll find that your ceiling tile not only goes up more easily, but also evenly. Now, this particular kit comes with these metal strips, which act as furring strips that you nail across your ceiling joist with the nails that are provided with the kit. It also contains these little clips which clip onto the tracks and do much the same job as staples, but with much less effort. On the back of the box there's an estimating chart, handy to have when you want to figure out how many tiles you need and how many individual kits you'll need. And nothing's easier to put up. Just be sure to read the directions on the particular kit you've got before you do anything else, because they aren't necessarily all the same. Basically, we're ready to start the installation process.
But to get to this point, there were some very important things we had to do first.
Like laying out our ceiling on paper.
And locating the joists overhead.
And marking them so that we have an accurate idea of where to nail our furring strips or tracks. One of the reasons why we lay out our ceiling on paper is to help us calculate our border tiles. Now, the border tiles are the tiles that go around the perimeter of the ceiling and should never be less than 6 inches wide. See, rarely will a room measure in exact feet. Usually there'll be a fraction remaining in inches. So to calculate the border tiles, measure the span between your walls. Now this direction, it runs 9 feet 8 inches. But if we divide the 8 inches, we end up with only 4-inch tiles, which won't do. But if we convert 9 feet 8 inches into 8 feet 20 inches, we end up with 2 10-inch border tiles. Now, use the same simple calculation for your other 2 walls. The steps involved in installing your ceiling tile follow logically, especially after thorough pre-planning. So the first thing you do is install the metal furring tracks.
Basically, what we've done is install these tracks on the ceiling so that they're perpendicular to the direction of the joists. The track at the wall should be installed so it's approximately an inch away from the wall. And each 4-foot track gets nailed up with 2 nails. And after you've got it nailed into the ceiling, give it a little tug to make sure that it's tight.
Be sure to check your furring track to make sure that it's up tight against the ceiling. Now, you may find that you need a wooden shim at the point where you nail if the track drops obviously out of level. You don't have to butt each track to the next at a joist, or even butt them tightly together. You can leave as much as a 1/4-inch gap between track ends without any real problems. There are 2 ways to go to finish off a row. One is to offset a full-length track about 1/2 inch from the existing track, and the other is to hacksaw piece to fit using a fine-tooth metal cutting blade. Install the second row of tracks at a distance 2 inches less than your border tile measurement.
Stagger the joints like this so that they don't line up across the room. You'll get a better result that way.
Your 3rd, 4th, and 5th rows and all the rest of your rows should be installed 12 inches apart. Except for your last row, that should be installed 1 inch from that side wall, just like our first track was.
By squaring this ceiling, you're giving yourself a little insurance policy that the final appearance will be better in terms of the alignment of these border tiles. Now the way you do that is to stretch two strings up at the height of the ceiling off nail heads in the wall. And what you want to do is check the squareness of these strings. And if they aren't really square, just adjust one of the strings until they are.
Now these tiles have been sitting in the house in open boxes for over 24 hours. This allows them to adjust to the temperature and humidity, and this will reduce fitting problems later on. Now to begin the actual installation, you want to go up to the corner that we placed our reference lines, and they act as our starting point.
You will have already cut your first tile. Just make sure that it fits snugly and that it aligns with the reference strings in the corner. It'll help if you cut your tile with a utility knife face up. Oh, and whatever you do, never cut off these flanges.
Get your clips up and in place and push them up to the wall. Now, install your first tile. Push the cut edge of the tile into the clips. Finish it off by snapping the clips on the tracks at the opposite side of the tile and sliding them onto the flange of the tile itself. Now, put your next 3 tiles up. Once you have the first 4 up, it's a good time to check to see everything is square and true. Now go on and put the rest of your tiles up, following this diagonal plan. When you get to the opposite wall, cut the border tiles about 1/4 of an inch short of the wall to allow for expansion.
When you get to the end of a track like here, you just snap a clip on and push it to the wall.
Cut the last tile in the row so that it's 1/2 inch short of the end wall. Position the tile, then slide the clip back into the edge of the tile using a screwdriver. Where your plaster and drywall are sound and the structure above is in good condition, you can actually glue your tile to the ceiling surface, or you could nail some sheetrock over the ceiling through the joists. Now, we'd like to emphasize, though, before you do any of this work, that your ceiling be completely dry and free of dust and dirt. We cover most of the important points on molding and trim in some of our other shows like paneling and woodworking. But the miter box and this back saw are real handy tools for this job. Now, one trick, if you're working on an outside corner and you want as invisible a joint as possible, cut your angle a little bit sharper angle than 45 degrees by manipulating that little bit of play that you have in your miter box.
Well, that gap we had between the ceiling tile and the wall is easily covered up by a piece of trim, as you can see. Well, if Avi and I have made this process look simple, it's only because it is. Now let's move out and take a look at a damaged plaster ceiling to see how we can get that into presentable shape.
Of course, you may have some plaster ceilings that you want to save. We're doing some repair work here in the hallway. So let's take a look at how to fix some minor cracks and small holes. A hole like this you can fill with some quick drying mud as a first coat. Force it in with a taping knife. Then once that's hard, then we can come back around with a finished coat of drywall mud.
Bigger cracks in plaster like this one should be undercut with a can opener blade so that you'll not only clean out all the loose material, but you'll prepare the edges better when you go to apply the mud on here to patch this crack. All right, you apply a layer of compound to fill this crack up. And then you take some fiberglass tape that I've cut off my roll and you embed it in that compound to cover up the crack. Now immediately, while this is still wet, you apply a second layer of compound on top of the tape. The tape, by the way, is up there so that no new cracks will reopen after this is all dry and set in place. Now you feather this compound out on each side so it's smooth with the surface of the ceiling. And it doesn't have to be too perfect, because what you're going to do is, after a day when this is dry, come back and give it a light sanding and then apply a second layer of compound on each side. Again, feathering it out so it's smooth with the ceiling. Then after that's dried and you've sanded it, if you have a smooth ceiling like we have, you'll be ready to paint. If there's a texture on your ceiling, you can apply yet another layer of compound just to imitate that existing texture. Then you're ready to paint after that. And that's about all there is to it.
I'm just putting on the last coat of drywall mud. Then once that's dry, I'll come back around and fine sand it smooth with the ceiling. You can see what a little bit of patching and repair can do to add life to an old ceiling. With this bit of work done, we're now ready to come back and paint the entire hallway. We've taken the last half hour to show you some skills and give you some information about how to improve the life and the condition of your ceiling. How far you'll want to go, how far you can go. Well, that remains to be seen. You know, Kurt, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, so do I. Well, as you've just seen, a ceiling can be much more than just a top to the place where you live.
Right, Kurt, you might say it's all up to you.
Well, join us again next week and every week so that we can show you another in our series of easy and inexpensive projects so that you can do it yourself. I'm Kurt Burbick.
And I'm Avian Rogers.
And thanks for being with us.